Taylor Byington owns 12 Crumbls, the viral cookie franchise that's taken over social media and the country. Their rapid rise has led to many calling for the brand's downfall. But Taylor isn't showing any signs of slowing down.
So number of units, we have 12. The portfolio will do about 13 million top line and sitting around like a 22% net operating income. Our short-term goal is we really want to get to 20 units and our foot's on the gas for that.
In this video, we discuss Taylor's journey as a franchisee.
Ultimately, we had the general contractor walk off the job with $400,000 of our money. And it was this biggest kick to the stomach.
From their tech,
Call themselves a tech company that happens to sell cookies.
the founders,
They're two cousins, so it's Jason and Sawyer.
and their secret sauce.
Recently brought on a third partner, Graciela, who came from Chick-fil-A. It's like the secret sauce has been, it's
Scheidler is your business partner, and you guys have had quite a journey before even getting into Crumbl. So I'd like to start at the beginning there with how did you two meet and when was that?
Yeah, so something that's funny is we actually met working at a door-to-door financial services startup that went to zero. We were in college and it was the thing that we thought was going to make all the money. And in a span of like 3 months, it went to zero. Ironically, saw a detail there that I don't share very often. It was for a venture fund. And the owner of the fund happens to be the former COO of Taco Bell and president of Burger King. And so it was unknowingly, it was like the first exposure we got into franchising, even though we had no indication that that was going to be where we'd end up. And so went to zero on that venture and kind of separated. He went on about his work in school. I was doing the same. We reconnected and decided that we wanted to try to acquire an insurance brokerage before we got to the end of school, before we graduated. And we ended up finding one here in the Valley. We're here outside of Salt Lake City. And we found one. We were putting under contract. And that was really like the first two ventures we had leading into Crumbl.
In college, you and Taylor just got door-to-door sales jobs. When I was in college, I played soccer, but I certainly was not looking for a sales job like that. But you guys were just hustling and wanted to make some money?
Yeah, so something that you'll learn about Utah culture is there's a lot of door-to-door sales that comes out of here, and people do really well. And so a little bit of my background, I played baseball while growing up, played for 2 years in college, and I was a failed. I knew I wasn't going to go pro by any means. And yeah, we got into sales, sold for different companies, but both of us were there for 3 or 4 years. And so door-to-door sales, it was very normal for us. I sold in Houston, Texas, San Francisco, LA, and then here in Salt Lake for a year. And so the rest of the world doesn't really do it quite as much as I understand, but it's definitely a big scene here in Utah. Shocking, I know.
It's fascinating. Well, you and Scheidler look to acquire and become ultimately like partners at an insurance agency. Can you take us through that? Because I know somehow through that agency, I think it is around the time when you get introduced to Crumbl.
Yeah, so I'll back up just a little bit and give context of why an insurance agency. So this door-to-door financial services startup, essentially what we would do is we would go in, I built the sales force, and Shradler was like the financial planner. And what we would do is we would sell insurance door-to-door, and then we would give the homeowner a free financial advisor, and that was Scheidler. And so that was like our first experience selling insurance. We had no idea what the context was, like what's good sales volume versus subpar. And we kept having people tell us that we blew it out of the water. And so we were like, well, never thought I'd get into insurance, but it seems like it could be pretty lucrative. And so when we reconnected in college, he went to a neighboring university here, and we ended up connecting and kind of deciding, man, there was a really good thing there. We should get back into it. Instead of starting from scratch, could we go and acquire? Neither of us come from money per se. So it was kind of like get it under contract and then figure out how to finance it from there. And that was the goal. And so yeah, to your point, we ended up calling around and finding an insurance agency that was looking to sell. And they were looking to sell really because they were going to be franchising like store number 4 and 5, I think is what it was, for Crumbl. They were like the very early franchisees. And that was our first exposure. It was helping this new franchisee exit his agency and get into Crumbl. So we were helping him clean up his books, kind of get the deal done, and realizing, man, there's a lot of potential here in this Crumbl brand that we weren't totally familiar with at the point.
I'd imagine even in just finding that insurance agency, your door-to-door sales experience probably came into play, right? Because you guys probably aren't shy about just approaching people, doing cold outbound, and making meetings happen.
Yeah, it was cold calls. It was a lot of harsh rejections, like you've got some nerve, and it was just like the naive young guys that were just trying to make a buck. But yeah, I've never thought of it as like the door to door background being kind of what we were leaning on, but I'm sure it is. You get thick skin when people keep slamming the door in your face every day.
That's what I was gonna say. At a minimum, you're not afraid of the approach, which my first job out of college was a outside sales rep. So in the HVAC world for this HVAC supply franchise. But yeah, it definitely thickens your skin when you got to show up unannounced places. And so you guys, through the insurance agency, as you said, you get exposed to Crumbl. But in Utah, Crumbl isn't actually new. There was already Chip. So if you could think back to that mindset, what about Crumbl maybe felt differentiated, maybe more exciting? Because it really has, from at least from where my vantage points, always had this buzz about it. And I'm curious what you guys were seeing back then, especially being in the Utah market specifically.
Yeah, so it was definitely like concept number two, three, or four. And I always share. So when I was in college, I was living in a house with probably six other buddies, and I had one of my buddies. He would always, probably like once a week, he would order chip, and so they would show up to the door, and it would be a salesman with a carton of milk and a single cookie. And so I'd open the door. I was like, how do people make money on this? There cannot be a business model in a bakery. It just doesn't seem like there's something there. And so that was like the assumption I had, and about as far as I had thought through it. Now, when I got to Crumbl and I was helping set up this, I guess a little context that you could have is my first experience really with Crumbl was actually literally wheeling in the ovens and setting the mixers for this guy's stores. They were here in the valley, and yeah, it was one of those experiences where I was like wheeling him in, seeing how heavy it is, thinking he's kind of out of his mind. And as we're getting the deal done on the insurance agency, we're like, there's a lot of potential money here. We're young, we're naive, we're willing to say that we could probably bet on ourselves. And so we kind of jumped in with 2 feet and just said, let's figure out how to get approved to do it. If people in the later stages of their careers can do this, like, why can't we? We have nothing to lose. That was about, sadly, as far as we thought through it at the time.
So even though looking at a chip, like why not go towards a chip versus a Crumbl?
I think that honestly, that was the first time that we saw some of the margins of the pro formas around Crumbl. It was less of a bet. Like we saw the numbers and we were like, these returns are better than what the market's going to get us in terms of if we put money into the stock market. It's better than really what real estate's returning. And so there might be a better concept that's marginally better than Crumbl, but we can see the numbers here. It's not a hypothetical, like this is actually what these are returning today. And so I think it was more just having a little bit of an inside look and being able to make peace with that and kind of jumping in.
And the price tags, you guys are, let's call it mid 20s, right?
Yeah. So I would have been 26.
And so you guys aren't at all intimidated by a minimum couple $100,000 build out.
Yeah, so we were terrified by it. It was we didn't have the money, that's for sure. What we saw is we were like, we know that people around us trust us, and we can put the deals together. If these numbers are true, we can go get creative financing and line up some, SBA money. But we're looking at it and it feels like this is a pretty lucrative return. There were a couple players here that were already in the franchising space. One franchisee specifically, I won't name names, but he had a portfolio of not just Crumbles, but other Everbowl concepts, kind of QSR, small box franchise retail concepts in the QSR.
Yep.
So it seemed like it was just more so like there was enough credibility in franchising that we were like, well, let's crawl, walk, run. And it was a very quick from crawl to run. But they're about, I'd call it at that time, somewhere around 500 grand a unit. And so we thought everything was going to be perfect on the front end. And obviously we learned our lesson pretty quick. But yeah, no, raising the money wasn't the downside or the concern at that point.
Okay. We're going to get to your first location and scaling the portfolio and all that. But I'm really interested because I think this conversation is just happening at a unique time where Crumbl's recent FDD came out. For those who aren't aware, net profit came in quite a bit higher, around 250K across the system in 2024, contrasted with 115K in 2023. So a little bit of an up and down few years. A lot of folks on the sideline for a while now have just been saying it's unsustainable. You and Scheidler, though, are in somewhat of an expansion mode. So I'd love to get your take on why you're excited to keep building with Crumbl and What are the core attributes? Why won't Crumbl fail?
This is a conversation we have almost daily. So I would say something that really stands out. So obviously we talk to emerging brands almost daily. That's really what we do outside of Crumbl every day is we're talking to new concepts. There's a lot of talent that's coming in, but what we have really woken up to is you can't replace the talent of who's at the helm, right? What we're confident in with what Crumbl's built is there has been volatility. There's the hills and valleys, ebbs and flows. But as you mentioned, I think that across the system, you're seeing more of a stability come in and kind of a leveling out. I think there's a couple of reasons that we could kind of jump into on that. But really, I would say at its core, it's probably not sustainable if it wasn't the talent of who's running at the helm. Something that I always tout that I thought was so fascinating when we got into franchising is Jason would always make a comment. Jason's the CEO here, and he's kind of like they're two cousins. So it's Jason and Sawyer. Jason was like the ops and SaaS or tech component. And then Sawyer is really the brand and the vision and like the aesthetic. And you don't really see concepts with those two worlds colliding in a franchise. I'm sure there's some, but there's nothing that really comes off top of mind for me. And they've done such a good job of sprinting as the growth has really happened. There's bound to be a rebound. And I think 2023 was definitely, you can see that in the FDD. And I feel like we kind of took our lashings to some degree. But the takeaway has been for me personally, and where I've been bullish, is they really do run it as like they call themselves a tech company that happens to sell cookies. And a lot of how they approach a rotating menu and A/B testing flavors, new bakery baked goods, it's a true SaaS or tech approach of A/B testing, trial and error, and there's continual iterations to the menu as opposed to having like a static, we've always been winning with these 6 kind of core flavors. And we're just going to ride this into the sunset.
When I interviewed Jason on my last podcast, he talked a lot about the internal, let's call it operating system that they've built for franchisees. So for whatever you're able to share on that, because I know you can't, we're not exposing the code here or anything, but it's good for people to know this when they're evaluating emerging franchises. What is the franchisor actually bringing to the table? And from what I understand from what Jason said, this operating system, it runs from the point of sale. So when customers are buying their cookies on the iPad to tracking your guys' bake times on cookies. And it's very data driven, which you've alluded to with like even the rotating menu. I'm sure they have a ton of data on what cookies are going to sell the best at what time of day and what flavor is going to make sense at what time of year. But what can you tell us about Crumbl's internal operating system that allows you guys to run a cookie shop at the level that the brand has been?
Yeah, I'm glad you actually brought it up because it is, I always explain Crumbl as being like the true business in a box. And what I mean by that is, so a lot of concepts, you're worrying about driving your own marketing. We're not allowed to touch marketing. I don't want to say we're not allowed to touch, but it's definitely limited and it could feel a little constraining. But they have a full scale marketing department that runs these campaigns. Just barely before this conversation, this past week, we had a Kardashians week. So it was a cookie for each Kardashian. Very unique of a collaboration, but the marketing department is doing that so the franchisees don't need to. And there's growing pains with that. It was a huge catalyst in sales, but it was also, there's growing pains with, the volume there. But we can't really focus on handling the volume, both from like the cost of goods side, the inventory, and from the labor side, if we're also having to worry about the marketing. It's a rotating menu, which means it's new inventory every single week. And that's very unique. We've learned that's been something it's having 6 separate cookie flavors every single week is really hard to stay on top of with your inventory. And you really couldn't do it if you didn't have this operating system in the background. And to your point, what he was alluding to, I'll be careful here, but yeah, they really have their own native point of sale solution that then connects with our in-house point of sale and also the iPads, our mobile apps and the internal tooling that they've given franchisees that has an operating handbook. It's got the ability to track trends and track a lot of the data that you still need to just operate a business, whether it's a franchise or a local mom and pop. You need to know what your top line sales are relative to your labor costs and your inventory. Otherwise, it gets so far away from you that if it's not kind of at a glance and like simple one click, I can pull it up without logging into 4 different tools, you can't really also operate a business and stay on top of that effectively. And so they've really kind of given that backdrop. So, okay, Taylor, now your job is just to dial in labor and dial in your inventory and stay on top of the culture and making sure that you have the right team in place so you guys can, you do what you're good at and corporate's going to do what they're good at.
Yeah, it sounds like they just really surface the most important operational aspects and where it might be underperforming, right? Like labor, or you said inventory, so it's cost of goods, which for any food concept, those are going to be your two biggest by a long shot. That's close to 60%, if not more, for some food concepts.
For us, we try to keep our cost of goods around 48%. And it's kind of like we baked in the math to say if we can stay around 48%, we know what our bottom line will be. And we really do lean heavily on the internal tooling that corporate's given us.
And it seems like it's totally end to end, right? So from the customer side to what you guys are looking at as the owners, it's all integrated and funneling into one platform. But I think you said to me in a prior conversation that they really nailed the audience and the experience. So while this tooling is great, while they have a marketing department, that's all great. The store still needs to deliver when the customers walk in the door. Can you expand on that? And why do you think Crumbl is just delivering a better in-store experience to customers versus maybe some of these other concepts like a Chip City or Chip, the original cookie concepts in Utah?
This is Taylor, so this is not speaking on behalf of Crumbl, but I'll say this is more as the critic. Sheither what he always says to me is, Taylor, you are not the target audience. So like your critical eye is not who we actually care to solve for. But what I would say is that when you walk into a Crumbl, it's the same experience, whether you're in California or New York, or whether you're in Canada and you know they're expanding into new countries. It's the same aesthetic, it's the same experience. You walk in, the first thing you smell is cookies being baked. They're being baked every single day. The dough doesn't get shipped in. We make the dough. We mix, we ball, we bake. We do everything in-house. And so you walk into a bakery and it's something that's familiar. The other thing that I think that really, when I say they nailed the audience, they nailed that customer experience and the expectations, that's really hard to deliver on. So one thing that I would say that like I am impressed by, I have more of like a technical background, and it's this, for example, if you order inside of the Crumbl app, it is the most pleasant experience. Checking out is super simple. It's 3 clicks away. You check out, it gives you your ETA, and it kind of gives you updates on where your order's at. As you pull in, it gives you the simple, like notify the team that you're here. And it's more the fact that it's all integrated into a single stack is what's so impressive. It's not like you're having to patch multiple tools together. So they're actually able to make that experience so kind of centralized. And I'm impressed as the customer when I go pick it up for like a family event or like an office party or something like that. It still to this day will give me a little bit of like, oh, wow, like they're still trying to improve this. This is still top of mind, is how do I continue to iterate and improve on the customer experience there?
It's impressive, and to say the least, an end-to-end consumer app, being able to simultaneously do that while drive the customer traffic where it even makes sense. Because most restaurants, it's like, hey, just go on DoorDash. No one's going to download your app. Because you really need a lot of scale to make a mobile app worth it. That's why usually only the tier one, like McDonald's, Starbucks of the world, are like investing heavily into a consumer app. But I'm curious, are you aware of and dialed into the different, let's say, tactics they're using to grow or incentivize buyers right through the app?
I'm not a big enough fish to have those kind of inside scoops. But what I tell you from my vantage point as an owner is that, they really do run it like a product company. When I say that, like they have these growth hacks or like these viral loops where every Sunday you get to see the new lineup for the coming week. And so people have this natural viral interest of, oh, what's being released this coming week? Oh, I love this lineup. Or maybe I hate this lineup. I'm going to wait for the next week. But you have this audience and this reason for somebody to come back every week. And to me, that's what's really impressive is they nailed the online component to building a brand, which is really, really hard. It's really hard to have a brand page drive millions and millions of followers, and they've done that from like a marketing component, and then they happen to be able to scale at the same time the product that you actually need to go to execute on that.
And the fact that it's, from what I understand, fully bootstrapped too, it's just pretty ridiculous. What do you think the future of Crumbl looks like?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things changing right now, right? So with the acquisition, I would say that's a question I have regularly is like, how do other concepts like this handle like a private equity acquisition like this or an exit. And it's still not finalized. I don't have any details that you don't have on whether or not it goes through. But the feedback we're getting is there's a lot of interest. This is a concept that has not really had any consolidation. So something that's unique about Crumbl is that there's no private equity in Crumbl, right? And so this is a lot. You can imagine they have north of 1,000 units now, and it's most of the franchisees have anywhere from 1 to maybe 5 locations. I'd say the sweet spot's probably 2 or 3. So when you divide that back, it's like 500 people, we'll call it, that you're having to manage as franchisees. And so we keep getting inbound interest from people that are like, hey, is there any, are they opening this up to consolidation? Is there any opportunity there? And obviously we don't know what that looks like. They haven't had that approval in the past. But I think that the market seems to be excited because it's more of like the traditional franchise approach at that point if the acquisition does happen. I think personally, internally, what my concern would be is it's like the secret sauce, the people at the helm. It's Jason McGowan, Sawyer Hemsley, and they recently brought on a third partner, Graciela, who came from Chick-fil-A. And so they have this like real killer team at the helm that I kind of look at them as being, they're special. Like there's a reason why they were able to do this and other people weren't. That's kind of a gap that I would say I would trip up on is how do you replace that? Is the creative mind still going to be there? I don't have a magic or crystal ball, but I would imagine they'd stay on. There's going to be some prolonged involvement with the brand ongoing, but that would probably be the one. There was like a downturn or a risk I would be underwriting or assessing for. It would be what the transition of leadership would look like.
Totally. There's definitely some kind of key man risk there with the existing leadership, especially as we've just talked about how impressive it is. They've been able to build all this tech, do all this marketing. Whoever steps in is going to have to keep all those viral loops going. But in addition, this is a two-parter. Crumbl in, I think, late 2023, they dropped the cookies from their branding. So it
Yeah.
used to be Crumbl cookies, now it's just Crumbl. And that seemed to coincide with, I believe it's monthly non-cookie product promotions. I know they've done ice cream, they've done tres leches, a bunch of different baked goods. So from that perspective, where is Crumbl heading?
I think that to your point, it's no secret now. Like it's Crumbl. We're really trying to capture the baked good category. Now, I always get asked, like, so there's already people in the brownie business or just like the sweet goods. Can you guys really expand into that? And I kind of come back to, and I might even just clarify what I said earlier about some of the downside concerns that I'd have with losing Jason Sawyer and Graciela. It's also, I look at it as if they are a product company or a tech company that sells cookies, once you have that muscle and that system in place, you can bring talent in to kind of continue to carry that baton, right? I say that leading into your question here on where the future goes with the menu. It kind of goes back, they A/B test what's working and what's not working. We've had a ton of flops. There's something that's literally called like the cookie cemetery, and it's the list of what's not coming back. And to that whole point, it's like this flopped. I remember the first, so one of our grand openings, we bought, oh my gosh, dude. It was some absurd amount. It was double bubble. It was a cookie with double bubbles on top, just like the gum. And I remember I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like maybe people love this. You want to eat the cookie, but you want to chew on the gum. Like I don't get that. So quickly that became a concept that was sent to the cemetery, and we had double bubble on our back of house shelves for a year before we were finally like, all right, get rid of this. We gotta clean it up.
Oh, man.
And so there's still a lot of those stories that are happening. It's not all wins by any means, but it's awesome to have the, like, it's to your point. We have these LTOs, these limited time offers, that we're piloting every month, and we're piloting new concepts to see what the market responds to, what hits and what doesn't hit. And I think that's kind of the next, I don't think it's any secret that we're trying to make our brand known to be more holistic baked goods and less cookie specific.
That's what I've been commenting on is there's been no press release that's like a declaration of Crumbl's intent, but from the outside, it's fairly obvious that that's where they're going. And even just social media posts we've made at Fran Dogs, we've talked about how far Crumbl is ahead of every other cookie concept in terms of unit count and other metrics. But you'll see the comments flood in where people say, oh, what about nothing but cakes or XYZ concept in the dessert space? So that perception is definitely already changing.
Yeah, it's funny that nothing bundt cakes is always the concept I'll get asked about, and I like nothing but cakes. I think it's such a big category that it's not like there's going to be one winner. It's not winner takes all. Maybe there is to some degree if you stayed siloed to just cookies, right? And now you're kind of like a Mrs. Fields in a way. I don't know. I think there's enough blue ocean there that it's not like it doesn't need to be winner takes all. Honestly, there's crumbles that are next door to a nothing bundt cake, and so I think there's a world where, and there's probably a third concept that I'm leaving off this list that is probably in the same strip mall, and they seem to all three kind of be working at this point.
Yeah. And this will be my final question on this area of the conversation. But you talked about how once they built Crumble, Jason and Sawyer, like a product company, like a tech company. So once you build that, and as you said, you can kind of plug and play with different products. Are you guys set up operationally? Because it's one thing to be able to just plug in an idea for a cake or some dessert, right? I don't know, like soft serve ice cream. I'm just going to make that up because that's maybe a good example. Because I'm guessing you guys don't have the capacity to make soft serve ice cream because you don't have the machines in your bakeries. But for the most part, is the business set up operationally where you're going to be able to plug and play a lot of different dessert bakery products?
Yeah, I think that's something we struggle with every day, right? So I mentioned the Kardashians lineup. I guess you're saying like more like the equipment and like the capacity to bring in like a whole new arm of a dessert category.
Yeah,
If it was to be frozen yogurt, I would imagine it's or soft serve ice cream. I don't know. I don't want to speak on behalf of the team, but yeah, there's nothing that we don't have any, anything that's in place for that today. We have piloted in the past. They had Crumbl Cream, which was their ice cream lineup. And so I think it's looking at what the current footprint looks like for their floor plans and what space you have. Obviously, it's no secret. We're leasing, call it 1,400 square foot small box retail. So it's not like there's a ton of unused space. So you'd have to repurpose what you already have, I would imagine. But they've done a good job of being mindful of that in the past. There's a concept that they piloted here where they were more of a, I don't even know what you'd call it, but it was more of a savory, here in Utah, sorry. It was more of like a savory good. Think of it kind of like I don't know if you've heard of kolaches, but it's like almost like a breaded
you're talking about Crust Club.
Crust Club. So Crust Club does do it, but they're doing almost like a version of Crust Club. Initially, there was a thought, again, this is like secondhand, that they would go put Crust Clubs throughout the country if this worked, and they would essentially make the Crust Club product for Crumbles. So it'd kind of be like almost a distributor, if you will. And they've since pulled the plug on that. But the whole idea there was how do you give the infrastructure to these existing locations without requiring them to become a Crust Club, if that makes any sense.
Totally. It is interesting because you have the footprint, you have all these stores, and you have a brand where customers are going to walk in the door. Yeah, I think the ice cream example I gave you is probably a step too far, but transitioning back to you and Scheidler, you're in 26, 27, and terrified of the build out costs because you guys don't have a rich uncle to fund this crumble dream of yours. I think let's talk about what was the market size of your first deal in the beginning, and then how did you guys go about putting together financing?
So the first ADA that we signed was 3 units, and it was kind of like take what you can get. It was such high demand. So to give a little bit of context of what's going on in the world at this point, this is all right before COVID. So we're in San Diego, California, which was a lot more strict than where I'm at in Salt Lake City, Utah, in terms of the regulation. And so we signed the ADA, and we're out and we're picking locations and just kind of getting kicked in the teeth. One, with just finding locations and options, but second, now that COVID's happening, arms are they're really kind of a little hesitant to what you thought you could line up for funding, whether it's SBA or conventional lending. We looked into some creative financing as well through private money, through hard money, through some from family. But there's so much unknown that we really had to get creative on the first 3 units to get going. And so it was a blend of private money and bank funding. Much harder. We went into it thinking it was as simple as applying for a mortgage, right? And assuming that you could get, if your debt to income checked out, that you would get approved for the funding and you'd be in your new house in 30 days. We thought that was the same experience with getting funding for a business. And we quickly learned, oh my gosh, this is a whole song and dance, and this is going to completely derail our build out timelines. And so that was kind of how we got started.
Amazing. And Let's talk about that process. 'Cause clearly, the financing side was some curveballs thrown your way. What ended up happening with getting the money together and then building in a market as first-time franchisees that you're not actually located in, right? You guys are in Utah. The construction's going on at a very weird time during COVID in another state that's at least a very far drive at a minimum away.
Yeah, and mind you, we still own the insurance agency, right? And so we're here in Utah, and we had an operator out in California, in San Diego. They had quit their job, and they're all in on running the stores and operating. So we had a pretty tight feedback loop, like a short feedback loop there. But, or so we thought, like the feedback loop was there. A lot of things went south quickly. So the whole plan was that we were going to bankroll profits from the first location to fund the second, to fund the third. And the plan was that we were really funding the first location through a blend of friends and family's investment. And then we were going to backfill and recapitalize it with long-term financing. And to some degree, we did that. Now, in that first build out, it just kept stretching, and we ultimately had the general contractor walk off the job with $400,000 of our money. And it was just like the biggest kick to the stomach, because we were trying to keep our insurance agency afloat. We're trying to, it's COVID. We're both new dads. We were married. We're both new dads. And so it's this time where just everything's up in limbo, but we're already fiduciaries on this investment. Like, we got to find a way to return this. And the build out keeps stretching. The operator keeps telling us all the right things at the time. And I don't think there was any ill will there. I think it was just misunderstanding. And one day, Shiler, just out of the blue, we get off a call with the general contractor, and he was kind of threatening me on the phone and saying, if you question my timelines, I'll leave today. I'll quit today. And I was like, no, like, we need you. Like, we want to make this happen. We're so far behind, and we have so many more locations that we need to build out. We just got to get a real scope on when you'll be able to turn this around. And Shiler just didn't feel good about the response. And so he got on the road, drove to San Diego kind of like on a whim. That's like a 9-hour drive from here, and gets there, and he FaceTimes me. And what we were told was like 90% complete. We had 3 build-outs. We were buying the equipment and like the materials for the store number 2 and 3 in San Diego at the time, and we were building out the main one. And he gets there, and he kind of pans the entire store, and it's very obvious. What the GC was telling us was like closer to like 85, 90% of the way done. It's like closer to 30% of the way done. And by the way, none of our materials are on site. They're with the GC. And so he walks off the job with all of our materials and with a like less than half complete location. And we were just like, our world turned upside down, And so then it really kind of, everything happened quickly. The entire team really moved kind of on a whim to San Diego and kind of just forced these things open. And in a lot of ways, we became the subs. Shiler's dad and uncle, they ended up being like pseudo general contractors. His uncle had a background in construction, and his dad was just all hands on deck at that point and just doing anything we could just to get this thing afloat. And so that was our first step into franchising. It definitely wasn't like we hit a home run day one.
I mean, if I've got this right, we've got 400K walking off the job site, delay after delay on that construction for the first location. Your new dads, the world is ending with a pandemic. That's enough to make a lot of people, and I'm not kidding, this happens, right? Some people just say, this isn't for me. I will cut my losses. Forget the money. It's really the physical stress and anxiety that all this uncertainty can cause. I mean, it's real. Like, people have heart attacks. People do commit suicide from just the intense pressure that entrepreneurship can create. And I'm not going to say that's common, but the consequences are real is the point, right? This isn't like a school project. So what about your backgrounds that just helped, even allowed you to get through it? Especially, I want to go back to maybe whether is it door-to-door sales? Is it your experience on a mission in college? Can you give us your experience with just rejection, maybe, to give people an idea of what preceded even these Crumbl days?
Yeah, so on that front, so you brought up a mission. We did both serve missions for our church, and that's the high level of what that looks like. So you move to a new place for 2 years, and you're literally knocking on doors and talking about your faith for 2 years. And I didn't grow up religious. I grew up very not religious. I grew up very, very rogue, and it was a whole different world for me when I got onto my mission. And I loved it. It was really good for me. It gave me a kind of direction. But no, the joke I always make is I served in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was on the college campus. And at the time, so when I'm on my mission, this is back, I must have been 20, I think. And sorry, not 2020, but at the age of 20, I'm knocking doors on sorority doors, right? And the Book of Mormon on Broadway had just come out. And so for those that don't know, it like kind of pokes fun at missionaries essentially. And I'm having sorority girls open their doors and be like, there's no way this guy's real. There's no way this guy's real. Who's playing a joke on me? You know? And so it was like, they're my same age. I'm single. They're single. Like this should be fun. And it's like the most humiliating experience. And I had that for 14 months. Right. And I say that all in jest, it was fun. There was a lot of good times from that. And I loved my mission, but yeah, to your point, I think I don't totally equate it to what got us through that first build out. I do think there's thick skin that you get. A big thing for Scheidler and I always tell people working with Scheidler for me has been, I've had a ton of business partners that have ripped me off. I've been overly trusting, maybe overly generous, and I'm sure I've had my own faults. Scheidler is a guy that I've had enough losses with and enough wins that like the way I explain it is I would never question if he debited the bank account. I would assume it was either like unintentional, if there was a mistake, or that he had enough trust there that I could call him later and he would give me the rundown of what happened. And you don't have that experience in business. It's really hard to find somebody that you can work with long term. And that's really kind of transpired through all of this. I think that we both knew that when this happened in California, this first store was just completely upside down and there was really no end in sight. We didn't know how it was going to work. We just collectively between the two of us didn't want to say this in front of our wives because there's so much uncertainty, but we're like, dude, we have to go down with this ship. Like, we can't cut our losses. Like, we have to see a path through this because we have family and friends money and our families are riding on this. We got to see this through. And how we get there, who knows? But it was kind of a day by day, again, crawl, walk, run, and a lot of good luck and good fortune that came out of it. But those 3 stores, we actually ended up opening. So those 3 stores we opened 1 month after another. So it was like, I think it was May, June, and July that we opened those stores that year. And so it was kind of like all of a sudden you had a fire hydrant going. And kind of like backing out of that, we opened 7 stores in 12 months across 3 states that year. And so it was just a really hard situation. I think in a roundabout way, Scheidler and I, having your back against the wall was almost an unfair advantage where you knew you didn't have another option. There's no off-ramp, right? So you had to figure it out. And in a way, having that off-ramp allowed us to say, like, all right, we're in this. We got to figure this out.
You burned the boats to some extent, so there was no other option. But man, it's a tough one. I've heard early days stories. That's one of the top. Just between COVID, the time of your life, first time owners, I just couldn't imagine how difficult that must have been. But thankfully, you're sitting here today with 12 units in your portfolio with Scheidler. So let's talk about kind of the scale and journey. But can you give us a sense, number of units and markets that you're in?
Yeah, so today, number of units, we have 12. We've got 5 in California. We have 1 in Flagstaff, Arizona. We have 3 in Nashville, Tennessee, and then 2 in Detroit, Michigan. So kind of spanned out across multiple markets and didn't learn our lesson. We didn't bring anything back to home, everything in Utah. But so it's 12 units. The portfolio will do about 13 million in top line and sitting around like a 22% net operating income is kind of the margins there.
Once you got location number 1 open, did it just resonate in the market right away? Or lines out the door?
Early days of Crumbl, I hope I'm allowed to say this, it's not so much this experience for our stores today. We had lines out the door where in our first store, I think they had people lining up. Our doors would open at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we would start having a line begin at like 6:30 in the morning. And that was like almost every day. And it would be a line that for hours and hours and hours each day. And it was kind of just, you did get to capture that. It's almost that intrigue, like, oh, I've seen this on social media, kind of bringing it all back to really prepping a market to come into. There's a lot of concepts where you have to go build that audience to grow into. And really is once you got your doors open, the markets for the most part, we had duds, of course, like there's duds that we have in our portfolio today too. But for the most part, our first few openings, it was some of that good luck that I was talking about earlier that was like, we need this win because we need to make some of this money back. And so I mean, honestly, that's another big thing I would say that really helped us not even cut our losses, but turn a really bad situation into a better situation. Is there was enough that we could, like, enough margin that we could bankroll into closing out the next build out and then the next build out. We were definitely over levered initially, and that probably would have been worse. It could have been, like you're saying, people could have closed up and said it's not worth it, cut our losses. But there was enough growth and enough opportunity there that it was able to kind of help us bridge the gap there. And we kind of turned into a rocket ship for us too. So we were just trying to keep up with the build outs and the performance of the markets.
After you build out your initial, I think you said three in the San Diego market, what's your next expansion? And did you buy a territory through the franchisor or did you acquire from a different franchisee?
So the first 7 that we opened were all developed and they were all build outs. We recently just started acquiring just within the last 18 months. And so everything was from dirt up, so to speak, or blank box, if you will. But we ended up helping open in Tennessee. And that kind of comes back to, I had connections out there in the market that I knew from living out there for a time, and then expanding into Detroit, Michigan, where actually the operator that really runs our stores today lives, and she travels across our markets each quarter. So it was really like we expanded into Detroit. One, seemed like a pretty compelling market, and then 2, because ultimately the operator that we now have, we used to have 3 operators, and the one operator we actually run with today, she resides out there.
How are you and Scheidler, and how did you, especially early on, just figure out what it takes to really build a team and keep people motivated, but also putting the leaders in place at the store level, considering that you guys, again, are in Utah and not walking into these stores every day?
It's kind of different today than it was in the early days. So early days, opening 7 stores across 3 markets in 12 months, we were on the road for most of that year. It was most of that year sometimes we were traveling together, other times we'd have to divide and conquer. I would say something that we had to kind of develop internally on our own was a project management ability. Like, we had to be able to manage multiple build outs all at once, especially after this first huge flop in our first location in San Diego. And with that, you have to have the right people in place. And I would say, even candidly, we weren't the best leaders either. Our operators, we had, like I mentioned earlier, today we have 1 operator that runs the 12 locations, but really we had 3, and 2 of them didn't work out. And that hurt as their leader, right? They're a business partner, but candidly, we felt like we kind of failed them too. And that sucked. That hurt. And you feel kind of sick inside because you wish you could have given the opportunity that you promised or you painted that picture for. And you live and you learn. And it's like we had the best of intentions, but you want to be Superman to some degree and put things together and have everything polished. But it did teach us that we were maybe partnering with leaders that it's almost like everybody had this overlap of skill set, and you need other minds and other skills to come into an organization like that, especially as you expand. And so today where we're at is our org, if you will, we have Shredder and myself, then we have Rachel, who is our operator that runs the stores across the 12 units. And then we recently brought on a consultant. Actually, he's an executive over at Sizzling Platter, and he is a consultant for us, and he really helps us run it like a well-oiled machine, like what he would want to see in his own portfolio at Sizzling Platter. He kind of strips back our numbers to make sure that we're, number one, growing and underwriting. It's not like us just shooting from the hip. We're kind of following a framework that, is from a much more at scale portfolio. And underneath our operator, we've got regionals in each metro with a store manager at each location.
As far as the framework, I think that would be helpful. We get brick and mortar business owners, right, of all industries. So for whatever you're willing to share on the frameworks that you're applying, especially given recent news, right? Sizzling Platter, if anyone doesn't know, when Taylor says they're a big multi-unit platform, they just got acquired for over $1 billion by Bain Capital. So any frameworks from the geniuses there, and I mean that literally, how did that kind of change the way you structure the org chart?
Honestly, it's been really helpful. What's nice, what I've learned about business is that you worry about different problems at different scales, right? And so a lot of the feedback that we get from the consulting side of that is really Shredder and I looking at growth and saying, how would you analyze whether or not is it time to grow? Would you want to expand into a new concept? And they look at it from a spreadsheet perspective. Like there's the checks and balances. It's very less emotional of What do you think? Obviously they are underwriting. If obviously Sizzling Platter isn't buying into Crumbl, there's no appetite there for the brand. But the way he looks at it is saying is there's not returns like this in most franchise concepts that we see. If you guys are teed up to be in a spot where you guys can continue to grow the brand, care of that relationship, and kind of keep your foot on the gas, And so when we underwrite deals, I guess if you're asking more specific, like what our buy box looks like, I think it depends on what the situation is. I think when I get asked that question, people ask, what does the profitability need to look like? Something that I feel like I've learned is in franchising, it's a little bit different than maybe like a venture-backed startup or something where there's kind of like a playbook on how we analyze P&Ls and like pro formas and really what the actual growth and then ongoing margins look like. Franchising, it's all mom and pops for the most part, like people that have some version of accounting in place and then their own way of assessing what their actual bottom line is. I would say that's like a huge problem in the franchise world is just lack of consistency. And so you really have to get comfortable with what are the above the line costs and like kind of margins or levers that I know my team can go pull regardless of what the below the line numbers look like. So if I'm looking at it from like a templated, take the market away, take the owner and the operator away from just making it agnostic Crumbl deal on the table, how I would look at it is I would look at my above the line metrics and say, I know I can tighten up my cost of goods and my labor primarily to be around this level. And I know that my G&A and my below the line costs, they are pretty uniform across 5 different markets at this point. And so at that point, what you're saying is you can kind of take back some of the like ambiguity of how one person does accounting versus how you do accounting. And you're able to kind of drill down into what the actual levers are that you can control. There's probably other concepts that's different than a bakery where that's a little bit more heavily weighted in terms of affecting your bottom line. For us, it's much more like kind of standard, if that answers your question. I guess maybe the one other thing would be where we kind of stay away from is we have kind of like internal rules on how much of a lease obligation it's going to be and really what that percentage looks like in terms of like on your P&L. We try to keep it around really as close to less than 1% as possible, especially if it's in like a more struggling market.
Well, I think there's a few things. The kind of approach, just the sizzling platter approach. I'm not surprised that they gave you that advice on the margins because I believe they operate, or now it's Bain Capital, but they were operating 400 plus Little Caesars, which those pizza concepts are. I've spoken to Papa John's guys who are doing 8% margins, and then Little Caesars, smaller footprint, takeout only. Maybe it's 10 to 13%, but either way, the margins you guys are putting up at Crumbl is just probably like they're salivating over that, I'd bet. But I want to talk about because 22% net operating income, especially at a time where there's been volatility, but then also the fact that you guys have 12 stores and you said most franchisees are 3 to 5. So I'd be curious to hear your take on if there are crumbles struggling and the median net income was 77,000 on 1.2 million. So that's under 10% is the median. And you guys are far above that at 22%. So is it location based where some markets are too small, like rural towns, or even that there's too many Crumbl units in a given spot that it's dragging down that city area? What have you guys seen that has allowed you to maintain this really high margin?
Man, well, you make me sound like I've got it all figured out. So, no, we've definitely had our ups and downs, man. I think, a lot of what you just said, there's definitely metros that I would say the franchisees would attest that maybe are oversaturated. Even as I say that, I'm thinking of one metro specific. I'm not going to say where, but I have a good relationship with the franchisees out there, and they're profitable. Like they're doing similar numbers to what we're doing. And I think part of it is definitely like I would say with any franchise concept, you'd have to worry about saturation. You'd have to worry about, at the end of the day, it's really hard to guess. We spent way too much time, and I don't know where the diminishing return begins of overanalyzing foot traffic, car traffic, which side of the street are you supposed to be on, which one's more advantageous. And I think we've made that work in the past, and we've completely screwed it up in the past. And so I think it's a blend of operations. This is me looking at it from Taylor's perspective, less that it's speaking on behalf of the brand, but something I would say that I've seen as a trend. If you're at the stage of a franchise where you don't have enough economies of scale, there's not enough meat on the bone to go build out an organization and a team and really pulling the levers for really optimizing your profitability, you need team players. You can't do all of it. Like I couldn't do all of this by myself. And so you need to have people play roles. That doesn't mean my team and that Taylor has the crystal ball and we can go into a bad market, bad area that's oversaturated and turn it around. There's still locations that we would say no to. That being said, I think that there's enough opportunity that there's those franchisees that there's not enough meat on the bone. They have 1, 2, or 3 units maybe, and they still have another job, we'll say. And you kind of have to ask yourself, like, what's like the threshold where this is worth it or not? Those are conversations I've had with some of the locations we've bought in the past, but also I think that on deals we've lost to somebody else. And I think that's something that's interesting about Crumbl is that really it had to be a high volume concept in the early days because if you only have 1 to 3 units, that's I'm learning more and more that's very rare in franchising. The people who kind of stay around, we used to think we had a huge portfolio and we got humbled real quick and realized, oh, there's like thousands of units in portfolios. Like we are nothing compared to most people. And so it's a little bit different of like, it's kind of an apples and oranges approach, I guess, in terms of maybe the profile of the franchisee with Crumbl and maybe the long lasting kind of PE backed or portfolio backed concepts that you see pretty standard in franchising today.
On that note, is that the goal? We've talked about Sizzling Platter a bit here. Are you either inspired by that and you want to get to that point? Or I don't know how much debt is left on, say, your 12 units today, but I imagine you pay that off and you just let them cash flow. That's a lot of money, especially you've already given us the revenue and margin, so we could piece together how much cash flow there is. But yeah, what's your longer term vision?
I think it's probably not the answer you want to hear. I think I like working with people that I like to work with on fun things. I would say I'm definitely not I can't go through that experience of the San Diego store opening, and realizing I was moving out to California and sure there was too, and explaining that to your wife. I couldn't go through that or have that kind of risk tolerance ever again. And so we're definitely in the season of life where we are much more compelled to pay off the debts than to take these mass profits, so to speak. And when I say massive, just the margin there, whatever that is. We're definitely more in like the risk off season. Talking about Sizzling Platter, I think that we love talking to people that are smarter than us. It's like we would rather somebody's already built the playbook. We don't have any intention of like going PE backed per se, like Sizzling Platter is, but they have a playbook and a model that has brought really smart people to come and run their org, right? And so that's really the inspiration that we have is we've got really talented, smart leaders inside of the brand. And we have these resources outside of the brand that we are willing to pay just to give us kind of guidance on how we should grow and how we should assess this. I think as far as our short-term goal is, we really want to get to 20 units and our foot's on the gas for that. As fast as corporate will allow us to grow, I think that's kind of our intent is that we want to get to a number that we've kind of been told 20 is like a solid kind of milestone, stop and turn around and see where's life at? Do we want to keep going or what's next? So 20's kind of been that number internally between Shredder and I.
It's funny, right? Just the fact that you're saying you can't take that risk again that you did on the San Diego spot. It's totally understandable, but it also gives you an idea, right, of there is that advantage to being young and naive because you guys are only where you're at today because you took that risk, but you have more to lose now today, though. So it's a totally natural evolution of the entrepreneur.
Yeah, and I mean, now it's like both of us, Shredder's having his third kid in a week or two, and I'm having my third daughter here in a month or so. So it's just like we're at that stage of life where you got to ask, what are your priorities and how much better can this get? Even if it can get much better, does it really change your life?
It's good perspective, man. And you started Cover Panda. So do you mind just kind of sharing in your own words, what is Cover Panda and how do you guys work with franchises through that?
The origin story of Cover Panda really comes back to trying to open 7 stores across 3 states in the 12 months. It was kind of project management. How do you stay on top of deal flow and see that these are getting opened on time? And really, how do you help? Day one, it was internally, how do we make sure we don't have any more of these pitfalls of losing all your money and like losing timelines? And that started more as a solution for ourselves. Quickly after we created a more productized experience with that, we owned the insurance agency. And we knew we were going to grow, and if we had 7 locations, that we were going to want to in-house our own accounting. And so now Cover Panda is really like an all-in-one service for franchises, and it's kind of expanded. We take a franchise from right before you sign your FDD. We'll help your franchisee with formation, setting up their banking so they can quickly get into financing. Strider's expertise is funding, and so he has all the relationships with banks there on expediting the funding process. But then we are able to back that out and have a accounting and insurance and payroll solution in place. It's a la carte, so it's not something it's all or nothing. But the offering that we give to brands and to franchisees is the story that we share. It's we made every mistake under the sun, and it hurt. It hurt really bad. Take it from us. This is the experience we had. We're continuing to grow. So it's not that we're just selling a product to you as if we're an outsider looking in. Like, we're in this. We're in the driver's seat. We're growing right now. And this is how we are growing our own portfolio. And that's kind of the origin story there. I would say where we're at today is it's definitely much more of a product offering there, where we've expanded into really the analytics and the operational and financial insights that you need to kind of pull the levers on staying profitable and deciding whether or not to grow.
I just think it's fascinating because what you guys have built, right, it does give you an inside look just from the accounting angle, payroll, and so on, into a lot of the other brands that our clients have covered Panda. So, given what we've talked about with your Crumbl locations, if you were to buy a new concept, what's like your buy box on what would get you excited, what metrics that you think are needed to hit for someone who's evaluating franchises to consider? And that can go even beyond the metrics. It could be other things the franchisor is providing a prospect.
Number one, I would say I would turn to you and ask how Fran Dogs would recommend me to do that.
Yeah.
More on the sales side. I think honestly, to your point though, I can't stress this enough. And I look at this as like somebody offering the service, the product and services around, Crumbl was an inspiration to us. It was kind of like what my experience was with getting lucky and having a product offering that really helped us, this business in a box approach. It's like every franchisee should get into this. I'm sure you could attest to this, but I can't tell you how often I talk to a franchisee that does not realize what they're getting into and thinks it's just up and to the right and it's going to be more of an absentee approach. Nothing about my experience is absentee. I'd say anybody that knows me, I work long hours and it's kind of around the clock and we're balancing multiple things. I think there's synergies there, but I would say that what I look for is ultimately who's at the helm, who's running the brand. Like, there's so much of this. I got lucky. I wish I had the Wall Street underwriting of how I got into Crumbl. The older I get, I keep saying, I was like, I bet on the right horse. I bet on the right horse, and I would say more than anything, like, concepts matter. Before Crumbl launched, I would say that people would say there was no money in bakeries, right? I had this unfair advantage of people don't know that Crumbl. I did conceptually, right, but just this story with the insurance agent selling, but it was still kind of an unvetted market at that point. And I would attest that it's a little bit more ambiguous, so maybe a little bit more vague than you're hoping for, but I really can't stress enough who you're betting on in terms of who's at the helm matters so much in terms of the trajectory of whether it's going to work or not.
I completely agree. And something JT and I talk to people about with Fran Dogs is that's one of the big criteria is the executive team. And it's subjective, right, as you said, but it just matters so much, the quality of that team early on, because that really makes or breaks the franchise in the first few years. So I don't think anyone could have predicted. It's tough because no one could have predicted Jason and Sawyer to grow a franchise from zero to over $1 billion in revenue, over 1,000 stores. It is not uncommon, and there's no shame in this, for founders to have to step out, kind of bow out of the CEO role at a certain scale, because the skill set to go from 0 to 1 is very different than becoming a full-fledged billion-dollar enterprise. That's why, there's Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and some of these like tech CEOs. That's what I'm most impressed with, because running a startup at seed stage is just so different than being a public company CEO, Fortune 100 companies, and it's just such a different ball game. And I don't think anyone could have predicted Jason and Sawyer to be as talented as they are, but I'm sure there was enough signs that they could take the brand pretty far.
Yeah, and I think that's the conviction we've had with the brand as itself in terms of us growing our portfolio. I think that the one thing that I would say about franchising holistically is I've never been more bullish on it. This is just me. This is Taylor speaking more from like partially the Crumbl hat, partially from, this is kind of why we're bullish on growing to 20, and also why we're building what we're building is I think that we're getting with technology and with more and more exposure to the good, the bad, and the ugly concepts, but there's never been more concepts launching franchises in history. It's more and more every year, and it's only growing. But there's also people are getting more and more exposed. Ironically, I didn't realize how much of a franchising hub Salt Lake City or Utah was. I didn't know about it when I got into this. But I think that more and more tailors are going to get exposed to the opportunity of franchising. And to me, I just think of it as like, if you want to be the Bill Gates story and going from 0 to 1, by all means, go do it. But if your goal is to go find like long-term personal wealth and well-being, and when I say wealth, that's all relative, right? It's however you want to define that. I think franchising is such a good vehicle for that. We've kind of been on the Cover Panda front, we've been a little bit more quiet on social media just because we've had a couple pivots where we've seen that there's such a bigger opportunity right now that's happening. There's a couple big partnerships that we've landed and secured where we've just seen that we need to not only help kind of go from formation to grand opening day, but really there's a lot of these Taylor and Stradler stories that people can get to 20 units in 3 to 4 years and maybe they want to exit. And how do you connect with buyers and sellers? And how do you have financials and operational data that's kind of in line with what buyers are wanting? And so I think I would kind of also on the flip side, I say bet on the right horse. I'd say there's more right horses now more than ever.
There's always new concepts coming in, and yeah, Utah is especially in the dessert category, a hotbed, man. The dirty soda concepts that are spinning up. Utah and Atlanta, Georgia area are these unofficial breeding grounds for franchises, it seems.
Yeah, well, it's been fun, and no, it's been awesome to meet guys like you and just some of the thought leaders in the space. I think we always kind of pinch ourselves that that's what's been so fun is connecting with a lot of these, for no pun intended, the big dogs in the franchise world,
Appreciate it. Yeah,
and get to learn from the other great minds. So it's been great.
totally, man. Well, look, thanks for coming on the show. Where could people want to follow along your story with Crumble, with Cover Panda, and so on, and Scheidler as well? Where would the best spot for that to be?
If you follow along on LinkedIn, it's just Taylor Byington. It's a weird last name, so I don't know if it'll be in the show notes, but Taylor Byington's the last name, and Stradler's name is impossible too. It's Stradler Bennett. But yeah, you can follow along on LinkedIn, and you can go to coverpanda.co, and you'll see some of the upcoming releases that we'll have.
Beautiful. All right. Well, we'll put yours and Scheidler's LinkedIn handles in the show notes, as well as the link to Cover Panda. So, yeah, if you're a franchisee or franchisor, highly recommend checking out Cover Panda. We no official affiliation, but have seen the product and just a big fan of what they're doing. And I think it's really important for franchisees to have access to this data, which we've talked about has been a big factor with Crumbl and their success. So, Taylor, thanks again, man, and we'll get you back on once you hit that 20 unit milestone.
Hey, I love it. Always a pleasure.